So knowing fully well that I stand between you and lunch, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that you have a delicious slice of pizza in a little while. And with that decided, I'm going to tell you the dilemma you now face. And that is, where do you go eat a slice of pizza in New York City? You may have been here before, in which case you've probably tried Ray's Pizza. It's pretty good. It's not quite, and it's definitely better than not Ray's Pizza. But you've also been around the meeting and you've heard a bunch of people talk about this place called Patsy's, which some people say is the best pizza in New York City. And now you have faced this dilemma of where do you go, right? You can go to Patsy's, which you're totally uncertain about in terms of whether it's better than Ray's or worse than not Ray's. But if you go there and it's actually better than Ray's, you gain the benefit of now every time in the future when you visit New York City, you can go to Patsy's and you can get the best pizza that's available to you. And so what I want to talk today is basically that scenario, which is commonly referred to as the explore-exploit dilemma, and two types of value signals that are relevant for managing explore-exploit trade-offs in an effective manner. So if you go to Ray's, you're deciding to emphasize the present in that you're exploiting what you've already learned to maximize the probability that you're going to get a delicious slice of pizza this time around. But if you decide to go to Patsy's, you're choosing to emphasize the future expected value of your choices, recognizing that what you choose in the present can potentially influence what's going to possible for you in the future. And I'm going to refer to this as an exploration bonus, or the bonus in value that comes from deciding to explore novel or uncertain options. And so everything we'll be talking about today is comparing how different structures in motivational circuits encode immediate expected value versus exploration bonus. So in terms of immediate expected value, we know a lot about how these are encoded in circuits coursing through OFC, amygdala, and ventral striatum. There's a bunch of reviews here. I'm particularly partial to this one that we just published. But we almost know nothing about how exploration signals, particularly this exploration bonus signal, is encoded in these same circuits. So one hypothesis is that these same circuits are encoding both of these signals, but we don't really know how to answer that question at this point. So what I'm going to focus on the talk today is how neurons in the primate amygdala, OFC, and ventral striatum encode immediate expected value versus exploration bonus, and whether or not the amygdala, given its sort of primacy in terms of there's strong anatomical connections projecting to ventral striatum and orbital frontal cortex from it in the primate, does it sort of encode these signals earlier than these other two structures to effectively bias how you manage explore-exploit decisions. Now, surprisingly, the ubiquity of which pizza is consumed throughout the animal kingdom, we decided to take a different approach to studying explore-exploit trade-offs. So we're using a three-arm bandit task where we have monkeys solve multiple explore-exploit trade-offs by saccading to different options that we present on the screen to them. So at the beginning of each recording session, we present three options to them. These are assigned independent reward probabilities from a symmetric distribution around 0.5. And any image can take on any of these three reward probabilities. Now, the monkey doesn't know those reward probabilities, has to learn them. So we're assuming he has a beta 2-2 prior. And his task, basically, at this point, is to find out which is the best option. So he goes ahead and samples among the three options. And say at the end of 10 trials, he has a general idea of what the immediate expected value of these options are. Now, how we induce explore-exploit trade-offs is that we'll randomly take one of these images and we'll replace it with a novel image that he's never seen before. And so this is also assigned its own independent reward probability, independent of the other two options. So every time we introduce a novel option, we're introducing non-stationarities into the reward environment. And now the animal has to decide whether to explore or exploit. Because he doesn't know the reward probability of that novel option, so the only way to do it is to explore. And so as a first approximation to see how sensitive the animals are to the task and how effectively they manage explore-exploit trade-offs is to just look at how often they choose each of these three options, classifying them as novel, best alternative, and worst alternative. And so that's what I'm going to show you here. So I'm plotting the fraction of times they choose each of these three options as a function of the number of trials since we introduced a novel option. And so on this first plot here, we're plotting novel, best, and worst. And you can see that the monkeys are novelty prone. They choose the novel option well above chance on the first trial it's introduced. But then over time, as the immediate expected value of the novel option approaches 0.5 and the average expected value of the best alternative approaches 0.65, there's this trade-off where they switch from picking one versus the other. And another way of looking at learning, because every option at some point was novel in the context of the task, is we can just look at how often they pick novel options that are assigned to high, medium, or low probability, and we can see that the animals well discriminate. So this gives us a good idea that the animals are effectively managing explore-exploit trade-offs, but it doesn't really tell us about why monkeys are exploring novel options, right? So if we want to go beyond just describing their behavior, we're going to turn to computational modeling. And so this comes back to this idea of how you should consider the future expected value of your choices in trying to determine when it's advantageous to explore. So, for instance, if the monkey is trying to decide whether or not to explore the novel option, he could consider the worst case scenario where it's assigned a reward probability of 0.2 and explore it for 4 choices or so. And then if he's not rewarded at all, he's only given up 2 rewards and he can go back to picking the option that he knows is better, so he can exploit his existing knowledge. Whereas in the best case scenario, if he decides to explore the novel option and it's assigned a reward probability of 0.8, he can go on continuing to pick it, and at that point he can gain 8 rewards going into the future. And so if you take the difference between the best and the worst case scenario, in a sort of heuristic way, you can compute the future expected value of exploring this novel option and say it's going to earn you, on average, 6 rewards into the future. And if you compare that to the number of rewards you could earn in the future by just exploiting what you know, where you only get 5, you can quantify this exploration bonus as giving you 1 extra reward if you decide to explore on the current trial and learn about this novel option. So we're using a POMDP model to explicitly quantify the exploration bonus and the immediate expected value on a trial-by-trial basis. I don't have time to go into the details of this, but what it allows us to do is construct value regressors for each of these 2 value signals, and then look at how well we can predict the animal's choice behavior. And so this is just the average means here, again, for the raw choice behavior. And when we use the POMDP to derive the value estimates and fit it to the choice behavior, we can well predict what the animals do in the context of the test. So normative, schmorvative POMDPs are informative. If we then compare the performance of the POMDP, because I want to make it clear we don't necessarily think the animals are, this isn't evidence that the monkeys are Bayesian, but if we compare the performance of the POMDP model to a novelty-based RL model where you implement a bonus in the immediate expected value when you first introduce a novel option on that first trial, it's something that people have used in the past to promote exploration in the context of these bandit tests. We see that the POMDP outperforms the RL model, and that there's a significantly greater number of sessions where the POMDP fits better. So this is exciting because as a neuroscientist right now we have a sort of principled normative solution to our task that well predicts the animal's behavior, and then we can now go into the neural activity and see to what extent we can see these signals. So what I'm going to show you here now is just 2 example cells to give you an intuition for how the cells are encoding these values. So here's a cell that's encoding immediate expected value. The more purplish colors are indicating when the animal has chosen a value that is an option that's high in value, and the green colors are indicating when he's chosen a value that's an option that's low in value. And what we see is that the activity of the cell scales with the chosen immediate expected value, where it's firing less when he's chosen a high value option and firing more when he's chosen a low value option. And then consistent with the fact that we're pulling off the immediate expected value for the animal's choices, we can just go in agnostically and pull out the activity of this cell and plot it just like we did the behavior. And you can see that the activity of the cell evolves on the basis of when he chooses high, medium, or low value options in a manner that's consistent with what you would expect from the model in terms of learning. And so we can do the same thing for a cell that's encoding this exploration bonus. This cell now, red colors are indicating when there's a high exploration bonus, indicating that the animal's chosen an option where it's advantageous to explore it, and the blue values indicate he's chosen an option where it's not advantageous to explore, so he's sort of exploiting the value of that cue. And what we see here in this cell in the amygdala is that there's a phasic increase in activity that's sustained through the period when the animal's anticipating the trial outcome, and it's firing more and more as it becomes more and more advantageous to explore. And so we can do the same thing where we now just take the average activity of the cell, plot it like we do the choice behavior as a function of the number of trials since a novel option was introduced, in terms of whether or not the animal chose a novel, the best or the worst alternative, and we see a signature that's very characteristic of what we see with the behavior. So these are example cells. We're more interested in the population encoding. So what I'm going to plot here now is the fraction of neurons in the population of the cells we recorded from each of these three areas, the amygdala, the ventral striatum, and the orbital frontal cortex, aligned to when the animal made his choice, with the blue line indicating the trial outcome. And then what I'm plotting here in terms of these probability distributions is effectively where the trial onset occurs, which is determined by the animal's reaction time. So the gray bar is effectively a 95% confidence interval where the options were presented. And what you see here is that the amygdala activity sort of leads the activity of the other two regions with a greater fraction of the population in the amygdala encoding the immediate expected value compared to orbital frontal cortex. And then with respect to the exploration bonus, the amygdala is encoding it more than the ventral striatum. The yellow regions here indicate periods of significance between the two regions that are being compared. So for the most part, though, these signals look pretty similar, but we wanted to try to get a better handle on whether or not there might be timing differences between these regions in terms, it's particularly in whether or not the amygdala is actually encoding these signals earlier. So what we did is we quantified it directly using permutation tests. And what you see is that the amygdala is actually encoding the immediate expected value and the exploration bonus associated with the animal's choice prior to him actually making his choice. And then when you compare that to what's happening in these other two structures, they're both coming online after the animal's made his choice. So it really does seem like the amygdala is driving these value and exploration signals, or potentially driving these value and exploration signals in these other two structures. So just to conclude, we found that monkeys explore-exploit decisions are consistent with normative counts of exploration and bandit tasks. What's nice about this is that the model is highly interpretable, and now we can design experiments where we explicitly manipulate things that we know should change the value of exploring in terms of the time horizon or the substitution rate. And then we've also found that amygdala neurons encode explore-exploit decisions earlier than neurons in ventral striatum or orbital frontal cortex. And so in addition to the modeling, we can now go in and design experiments to try to tease apart to what extent the amygdala is facilitating or inhibiting exploration, and how circuit-level interactions may be important for navigating these decisions. Okay, so thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions.
If I can have the next speaker, come up and set up while he's taking questions.
Yeah.
Sounds really interesting behavior. I had a question about the neural responses. It looks like from your population plot that you're plotting the percentage of neurons that you put into specific categories. But don't some of the neurons reflect more than one parameter, and more than one parameter?
Yeah. So we're putting all the parameters into the model. So that's an ANOVA model where we're interrogating the activity of each cell across a variety of neurons, and we're just pulling off to what extent that main effect happens to be encoded in the population at that time.
Or do most of them reflect mixtures of the parameters?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thanks again.